All right. Looks like things are starting to slow down a little bit. So let's get started here. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar on AI Essentials for HR Professionals. Today's webinar is, of course, brought to you by Queen's University IRC. And my name is Lindsay Van Zulen. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's very exciting session. I'm excited to be here with you today as we explore how HR professionals are navigating the evolving world of AI and unlocking its potential in the workplace. To begin, let us acknowledge that Queens is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee First Peoples territory. We make this statement in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous presence here, which dates back over 10,000 years. We are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. If you're unsure of the traditional lands in which you're situated, we would encourage you to learn more about the territory upon which you sit. So before we dive into today's session, I'd just like to take care of some housekeeping items that we have. So firstly, this webinar is being recorded. If you do need to step away or miss any part of today's session, don't worry, because you will receive a link to the recording within a few days. Secondly, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to submit any questions you have via the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll reserve questions for a dedicated Q&A portion at the end of our presentation. I'm trying to get through as many questions as we can, but if there are some that we aren't able to address during that time, we'll be sure to follow up with those answers. So now it's actually my pleasure to welcome our facilitator for today's webinar, Wiley Burke. Wiley is an innovation consultant, educator, and leadership coach with over 15 years of experience in business administration, HR, organizational design, strategic and operational planning, and leading high-performing teams. She teaches 2 programs at Queen's University IRC, and is a leadership coach through the University of Toronto's Centre for Learning and Leadership. Wiley has worked with organizations like the United Way, CIBC, and Sick Kids, leading cultural transformations and large-scale change strategies. Passionate about unleashing potential, she specializes in aligning strategy with organizational structure and creating sustainable, people-centered solutions. Wiley holds an MBA from Queen's University, an honors sociology degree from York University, and is an Adler-trained coach. We're very excited also today to share that Wiley will be leading a brand new program that's running this fall, AI-powered workforce planning. That program will be running October 7th through 9th in our virtual classroom, so stay tuned for some more details to come later this week. Thank you all for being with us today, and without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Wiley.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was a mouthful. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Really excited to spend the next hour with all of you. The topic of AI and digital transformation, it's coming fast and furious. So if you feel like you are drinking from a water hose, you are definitely not alone. And so hopefully today we'll provide a bit of an opportunity to just really cover some of the basics. We don't have a ton of time today. So I hope that the next hour you will find both insightful and practical. So we are going to run for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then we'll do 15 minutes for Q&A. And speaking of AI, how did I use AI this morning? I popped into my chat GPT the outline for the webinar today. And I asked it to come up with a schedule to tell me, the cadence of my timing for the presentation, because I tend to be a fairly unstructured person, and AI did a beautiful job of giving me that schedule, so we can all test that out today and see if I can keep on track. So let's get started. Let me just share a little bit about what we have planned for you today. So we really want to start thinking about how is this AI digital transformation impacting HR specifically? What does that landscape look like? We want to start building some confidence, right? Just in terms of how are we using AI terminology, what are the different tools, what are the different techniques that we can actually employ. So we'll go through some of that. We're gonna go through the various use cases specifically for HR so that we can start to develop a better understanding of the different ways that you can use it in your day-to-day work, and automate some of those sort of more routine tasks that you have to get through. What else we're going to talk about, really importantly, right? What are some of the risks that are associated with AI? So things around bias, data privacy, accountability. We're going to talk about prompting as well. So prompt engineering. We'll talk about how do you actually frame what it is that you want effectively so that you can get the right kinds of output depending on what it is that you are looking for the AI tool to do for you. And the other piece that I think Lindsay is going to pop into the chat, we have an AI toolkit to share with you today. So you'll have an opportunity to take a look through that, and that will help hopefully guide some of your work post session today. So we're going to kick off with a poll. And so Lindsay, I think you're going to pop that up on the screen. And so we want to just get a pulse here on how confident you feel about using AI in your HR work today. And so you can see that coming up on the screen, and we'll give you probably about 30, 40 seconds here to pop in your answers. Okay, so off the hop, I'm seeing that people are starting to integrate AI into your HR work. And then, yeah, equally so, right? Curious, but also unsure about how to apply AI in your role. So we'll be talking about that today too. And some folks not feeling confident in using AI at all. And then we see here about 8% feeling really confident and capable of using AI in their day-to-day work. So that's great. Okay. I'm just going to share those results quickly so everybody can take a quick look there and see the spread. All right. Okay, great. So why is this so important for us to be talking about right now? I mean, needless to say, right, we're talking about this sort of water hose, and we just hear about all these different tools and technologies that are coming our way fast and furious. So we really want to be able to wrap our minds around what does this actually mean? How do we use them? And specifically within HR, right? What does it mean for us in terms of that augmentation, right? So that, what are those specific tasks that we can automate? The other thing that I think is really important too is, we see how Mark Carney is appointed the first ever Minister of AI and Digital Transformation, right? So we're going to Canada has been lagging in this area to begin with, but I think that really does signal a significant shift, right, in this digital transformation across Canada, right? This isn't optional anymore. And the other thing that's nice about that too is I think that's going to help start to build the sort of guardrails, right, and the governance around AI that all of us need to have. And we're going to be doing a bit of a deeper dive into that today as well. So we see from, reports like McKinsey, 80% of HR functions are going to be augmented by AI, right? So we are really in this significant shift, big change. And how are we actually understanding that for ourselves and then rolling these things out really responsibly in our organization, right? So being strategic and understanding the ways that we can use AI and also the ways that we're not going to be using AI in our organizations, right? And providing that sort of guidance to people in our organizations. Of course, we know that one of the greatest gifts of AI is that it can boost efficiency, right? So we also want to understand, where does it boost efficiency? Where does it help? But also those places, as I said, where it's not the right approach. And I think HR is really well positioned for us to understand how the technology impacts the people. And so that is really a very defined and significant role for HR as we start moving through really significant digital transformation. So we are, that bridge, right, between the people and the technology, and really understanding the ethics and the fairness. What are those practices that we want to make sure that we are embedding into the deployment of AI inside our organizations? And so as as HR leaders, we really need to be curious, courageous, and strategic. So I always think back to when the World Wide Web was this new thing. And I remember not being able to sort of wrap my mind around what it meant to have this place where all of this information was sort of stored and dumped, and we could just go in and access it, right? And so building that confidence and attending sessions like this, right, to start building that digital literacy, that confidence in terms of understanding what AI is, what the tools are, that digital literacy, and then how are we actually going to move forward. So we want to think about organizational readiness, right, as part of all of this. So how are we actually understanding our own organizational maturity when it comes to AI, right? What does that rollout look like? So we want to be really strategic and mindful that we are setting the right kind of pace for AI adoption inside our organization. And in order to be able to do that, we really need to be able to center ourselves in our current maturity level, right? So is your organization in an exploratory phase, right? Where, people are trying out the tools, but they're trying them out in sort of isolated ways, right? Maybe not sharing with other people in the organization where and how they're using those tools. And then we can move into that adoption phase where you might be piloting programs and use cases inside the organization. And then that sort of, that more mature state where you're really optimizing the AI and it's being integrated into your systems and your strategy. But the key thing here, right, is that we don't want to move too quickly and overwhelm people. So you need to center yourself where your AI maturity is inside your organization, and then think really methodically about what does that plan look like. And we'll talk a bit about AI strategy and what that really means. The other piece here, when we're talking about the role of HR in all of this too, is we really need to ask ourselves, how does this AI align with our organizational values? How is it fitting into our culture? Who are we? What do we stand for? And how is the AI tool representing those things? And we're going to talk about how these tools function in terms of what is the information that we're putting into them, and how does that information actually start to shape the way that the AI will work for us. And that's where we can kind of walk that fine line between having a tool that's really effective and working strategically inside your organization, or, right, if the data that we're putting into the tool is ineffective and is not sort of representative of who we are as an organization, your outputs, right, are going to be very influenced by that. So we have to be, again, really cautious about what kind of inputs we're putting into the data. So the other piece here is we want to think about the tools that we are, if we're bringing in vendors to start bringing in specific AI tools, you want to make sure that you are asking those kinds of questions of the vendors, right? How have the tools been trained, right? What, is there an element of DEI commitments that have been trained into the tool? What is the communication, the sort of tones, those sorts of things? How has it been trained? And then how have they tested it? So you want to be able to understand sort of some of the governance around the way that the tools have actually been built. So, and the other piece too, I think that's important to note is that HR, we can't wait for AI or for IT to sort of, there's so many different acronyms. We can't wait for IT, right, to just roll this out inside our organizations. HR really needs to be sitting at those tables because, as I said before, we are the bridge between the people and the technology. And this is going to happen, right, regardless of how far along we are individually in terms of that maturity level. So the quicker we are from an HR profession to start adopting this and understanding what it means, the better able we are going to be to inform the sort of deployment of that from a people-centered perspective, which is really important. So I want to dive into, building. We talked about the AI, sort of the literacy piece here. And so we're going to spend a couple minutes now just really diving into what are these different tools, how do we define them, and what do they do for us? So when we think about AI, right, AI are machines that are performing tasks that normally require human intelligence. So one way of understanding that would be like Netflix recommending what to watch or a chatbot answering questions about benefits, right? So it understands language, it will recognize patterns, it will make decisions, and it will also learn from experience. So when we move into generative AI, that's a specific kind of AI. And generative AI is the AI that we're probably more familiar with in terms of the chat GPTs, Copilots, Gemini, etc. And so this is really sort of like a content creator. So if you think of it, as the regular AI, as your data analyst, generative AI is really your content creator. So it will spit out new content based on what you feed it. So another way to kind of think about AI is they're sort of like child prodigies. So if you imagine a child prodigy that's just brilliant, right, that has all of this great information, but it is totally lacking in ethics, morality, empathy, right? And so our job, if we think about using that analogy of raising children, is to raise them by creating the environment where they learn about ethics and morality and empathy. And so that's part of how we need to interact with these tools, is to help them grow and to help them develop in the ways that are important for us and in the environments that we exist in. All right, so let's dig in here to some of these key terms that you've probably already heard about, right? So machine learning, this is a type of AI that really enables systems to learn from data. So if you think of it as a self-tuning instrument, the more data that we are able to put into the tool, the more improved the system is going to be, right? It's going to get more refined, the more information that is input into the tool. So NLP, natural language processing. So this would be, the Siris of the world, or even, if you've chatted with a chatbot, right? So this is really how AI understands and responds to human language, right? And we can see when we use chatbots, right? Those chatbots actually respond to us in a way, right? They're speaking our language. So there's sort of an ability to go back and forth with these chatbots. So LLM, these are the large language models, and this is what really fuels generative AI, right? So they have all of this incredible information. So if you can think again about sort of like this research assistant that you have, it's super intelligent. It has immediate access to everything that's available on the internet. But again, your research assistant has no morality, right? No ethics. And so that's sort of what you're dealing with, this massive amount of information, but the guardrails don't exist in terms of the sort of ethical components there. Predictive AI, and this is the sort of AI where if it has access to historical data, it's going to start sort of predicting what might happen in the future. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that when we get into the use cases in a minute here. Chatbots, if we think about chatbots in the context of HR, it's almost like your reception desk. So it's that sort of first touch point for some of the sort of basic FAQs, that people might come to HR with. And so the chatbot can really act as sort of like your receptionist who's going to be able to field some of those more basic kinds of questions. Prompt engineering is something that we are going to do a bit of a deeper dive in, and this is really about how we are instructing the AI tools to get us whatever the output is that we're looking for, right? And so the better that we are able to refine the inputs, the better we are going to be able to align it to what we're looking for from the actual tool. And I think the key here is, we hear the phrasing of garbage in, garbage out. Whatever information and data we put in. So, sometimes we think of these tools, when we talk about boosting efficiency, we just dump a bunch of information into a tool. if we actually haven't taken the time to look at the data and actually create structure to that data and organize it in a way that's actually going to help. We want to help the AI tools to generate whatever output it is that we're looking for. So if we just overwhelm the AI tool with a bunch of unstructured data, that is going to directly impact the quality of that output. So the work, again, from the human side of this is how are we actually structuring the data in really effective ways, right? And how are we manipulating it so that we can get data that might be meaningful? For example, if you want to get certain insights about different roles inside your organization, how are you organizing the data in such a way that your output is going to generate insights about specific roles? It could be time stamped if you want information based on the last year or 2 years. But in order for it to do that, again, you need to spend the time to organize and structure the data in a way that's going to get you the specificity that you're looking for. And you also want to be able to trust the output, right? So you could dump a whole bunch of data into an AI tool and it's going to spit something out. But the reality is can you trust that data if you haven't trusted the data set that you have put into the tool? So we're going to do a deep dive in a minute on ethical AI as well. And so this again is really about how are we using AI responsibly? So how do we use it to avoid bias? We're ensuring fairness, and we also want to maintain human dignity. And so just because, I said this before, just because AI can do it, and sometimes when we're really busy and we think we're just going to pop this into ChatGPT, it doesn't mean that the AI tool should be doing it. And so again, that's where humans need to use their discretion in terms of how they're engaging these tools. And also from a data perspective, scrubbing data of personal information. So obviously, in HR, we carry a lot of sensitive information. We don't want to put that into a chat GPT and have it have access to important sensitive information, right? And so it's really thinking thoughtfully about those things. All right, so we're going to dive in here to some practical use cases for HR in the context specifically of HR. Did I say that right? We're going to talk about how to use AI in various HR functions. So we'll go through recruitment, talent acquisition, onboarding, and the candidate experience, training and development, performance management, which you will see I prefer to call performance engagement or enablement. So you'll see that on the slide. We'll talk about workforce planning and analytics, EDI, and then how we can use it for HR admin and policy development. So when we're talking about recruitment and talent acquisition, this would be one of the places where I think AI has been adopted pretty quickly inside organizations. So we know that AI has the capability to scan, huge amounts of resumes in minutes, right? And they can rank based on the criteria that you put in. They can rank your talent, the pool of candidates really, really quickly. They can also, different tools will also be able to help you write job ads. So again, we'll talk about EDI in a minute, but if you wanted to say plunk, a job description into an AI tool and say, can you sort of scan this job description for any sort of bias, right? And remove any bias and then rewrite it. So you could actually prompt it to say, rewrite this job description to sound more inclusive and inviting, especially to early applicants. Or again, if there's a specific group of people you're trying to target, right? So hard to fill roles, you could say, if you know sort of what those specific skills are that you're struggling to bring into the organization, you could say, could you target this for people who have X skill, and it will refine that job posting for you. So there's lots of different ways that you can adapt and modify those inputs to meet your specific needs. So then in terms of chatbots, how do chatbots help us recruiting and onboarding? So that would be a great spot for candidates to go, right, and ask questions about the recruitment process, timelines, any sort of, specific information about your organization that you feel would be important for candidates to know. The chatbot would be able to help field a lot of those kinds of questions. The key here, we're going to talk about this too, right, is there's been some issues we've seen. We'll talk about Amazon in a minute, places where this hasn't worked well. And so again, really trying to think about the lens that we need to be putting on when we're using AI for these things, to make sure that first and foremost, we are being inclusive and we are being fair, and we're taking an ethical approach to how we do this. And we're going to be talking about explainability too, so that when we do get the data output from AI, does the AI tool actually have explainability? Meaning, can it tell you how it got to the output that it got to, so that you then are able to have more confidence in whatever sort of decision the AI tool is sort of prompting for you to take. So let's move into onboarding and candidate experience. So tools like ChatGPT can create personalized welcome emails. You can generate onboarding checklists. Chatbots, again, could be a great tool that you could use to help field a lot of questions for a person who's coming into your organization around, like, what can I expect for the first day? Where do I need to go? Where do I go to access my benefits? So some of those very sort of basic HR type questions. Again, I think we need to really be thinking strategically or mindfully about what is the hybrid approach here, because we certainly don't want to only be onboarding people through AI, because obviously there's no sort of personal touch there. So how are we being discerning about the places and spaces where we want to be able to leverage AI so that we can automate those sort of more basic routine tasks? And then it gives us the opportunity to really focus on the people-centered approach in terms of the onboarding. So how are we actually really enhancing the people side of the onboarding approach? Because we've been able to offload a lot of that stuff that can, those routine tasks that can take up a lot of time. So training and development. AI is great for creating personalized learning paths. It will assess skill gaps inside your organization, skill forecasting. It can do predictive analysis for you as well, and it can create some correlations around things like performance and retention. So if you wanted, right, you can use AI to really analyze a scope of information from an employee's role, past performance, what their career goals might be, any training history that they have, and that's gonna start generating various insights for you. And again, it depends on what specifically it is that you're looking for. So you're gonna have to prompt the tool to help you do that. So if you're looking to get more information on how to build a development plan, right? So you're going to input that data. You're going to make sure you're scrubbing it of personal identifiers, and you're going to ask the AI tool specifically for what would be a really good development plan if I want to retain this person. When we're talking about skill gaps, right, we know that this has been a huge headache for organizations, and it's a big thing to wrap our heads around in terms of really understanding the nuance of skills in our organization, and how do we actually understand what the skill gaps are today and where are those risks going forward. So again, you can input all kinds of data sets into the tools to then have the tools sort of predict where your skill gaps are. And it can also, it can give you trends in terms of, skill gaps in the future as well. So it can also, as I said, flag patterns. So you could start to understand that if there are certain managers in your organization who haven't, for example, taken certain types of training, you can get AI to start predicting, if these managers don't have this training, they are more likely to leave, right? Or they're more likely to experience burnout. So it's really interesting in that way too, that you can start doing that predictive analysis when it comes to training and development. What do we need to sort of, managers in sales, for example, if they're not getting, really strong conflict management training, they're going to be more likely to burn out. So that you're kind of keeping a pulse on some of those things from a development opportunity perspective, but then also you're managing your risk there as well. So when we talk about performance enablement, we've kind of touched in on that too with regards to the training and development piece. But here, this is a real shift in mindset. And in the talent management program we run here at Queen's, we talk about how performance enablement, which is more traditionally understood as performance management, how are we actually shifting our mindset around this work? Traditionally, many organizations will do sort of annual checks, right? And so that feedback might be super delayed. You might be having a conversation once a year with your people on performance. And that isn't best practice. And AI can really help to build in a way more nuanced and continuous sort of feedback loop with your employees. And so this again, the AI has the ability to sort of look at, it can scan emails. You can feed it past performance review information, and have it generate sort of better insights for you. The other thing that AI will do really well is it can help you frame your feedback more effectively, right? So sometimes feedback can be too loose. So you could use Chat GPT or, tools that you have embedded inside your organization to say, how can I make sure that this feedback is really clear, and that I want it to have X impact, right? And so you can put all of that information into the tool, and then it can spit out to you, a recommended approach in terms of providing feedback, and making sure that that feedback is actually actionable, right? So it does have the ability to really frame some of the feedback in nice ways. It has predictive analysis or predictive insight. So, for example, certain roles, it can predict if somebody's in X role for over a year or over 2 years, they're likely to start to get disengaged, right? And so at X period of time, you might want to start considering a stretch assignment for them. So you can then start planning on your teams, right? Who's in what role and what sort of stretch assignments you might put in place over a period of time to make sure that employees are feeling like they're engaged and they're getting those sort of development opportunities, as well. All right, so the big dive into workforce planning, and as Lindsay said, we are very excited because we will be launching a new program in the fall, and that program is AI-powered workforce planning. And one of the things that I have seen, especially in the work on the talent management program, is a real shift and a huge emphasis now on workforce planning and analytics. And that is related to all of the things that we know about in terms of the war on talent, skills gaps, et cetera. And so how are we actually setting organizations up to do this work really well? So your AI tools can really help you with the forecasting of talent needs. How are you optimizing your talent? Again, it will do the skills gaps analysis that we were just talking about. And it can also help you to understand labor market trends, right? So that it's enabling you to get a really big, broad picture of the landscape to help you make some decisions. So when we think about workforce planning, it's really all about getting the right people with the right skills in the right place at the right time for the right cost. A little bit of a mouthful there. And so AI can actually help you figure out what would the perfect sort of collection of your staff look like. And what I mean by that is what contingent of your workforce should be full-time, should be part-time, should be gig, or external folks coming in for sprints. So using the AI in very nuanced ways to be able to help you figure out what that sort of landscape is for you in your environment to optimize your workforce. The other piece it'll do for you too is it can do that scenario planning that we were talking about. So, for example, if you wanted to open a satellite office in Alberta, you could ask the AI tool to tell you how many people you might need, where do you need them, and what would the cost for that be. You can also use it from a diversity perspective. So, what mix of hiring strategies will help us reach gender parity in our technology area by X date, right? By 2026. So it can really give you this super dynamic information, but again, it's really figuring out how are you using that tool, what information are you inputting, so that you can get the information out that's going to be insightful and it's going to be aligned to the challenges that you are experience specifically in your organization, because that won't necessarily be true across the board. So here we talk about how does it help with EDI, the EDI work that we're doing. So it can really detect representation. So for example, an AI dashboard at a glance can tell you how representative your leadership team is based on your employee base, right? So that's really important, really insightful. It can also detect systematic patterns. So, for example, if you have high-performing racialized employees who continually are passed over for promotions, it's going to pick up on that pattern and it's going to tell you about it. It can analyze hiring, promotion, pay data, and it can detect patterns of inequity there. So again, the key to this work is that it needs to be trained properly to be able to do this. So how are we inputting really inclusive and diverse data sets that are going to spit out the right kinds of insights that we're looking for? So bias in, bias out. So that's what I mean when we're going back to the notion of just dumping a bunch of data into an AI tool, right? You've got to be really careful about that. What is the data? Because if you're feeding it biased data, it is going to replicate that at scale. So really important, again, to think about how we're framing the data that's going in. What are we going to talk about now? So employee engagement, this is a great way to do quick pulse surveys, right? It can automate insight collection, early signal detection around, it'll pick up on words like overwhelm, frustration, burnout, so that you can start getting those insights. And again, it can, if you use the data right, it can show you where some of those issues might be bubbling up in certain areas of your organization so that you can take a targeted approach to addressing it, right? It can tailor solutions, right? So for example, if one team thrives on recognition versus another team who's going to thrive on career development opportunities, and you've sort of deducted that from the engagement survey data, again, you can create these really nice tailored solutions to really support your people where they're at. Admin and policy. So ChatGPT can be great at providing you with first draft policies, procedures, updating documents as well. So as we see legislation changing, so for example, when we think about this new, the Minister of AI and Digital Transformation, I'm sure we're all going to need to keep an eye on this. What are those legislative changes coming down? What are the ethics policies that we need to stay on top of? And so how do we make sure that we are embedding any of those sort of legislative changes into our policies? So again, that's where you could use AI to help you to do that. You could say, prompt it to say, generate a draft remote work policy based on Ontario labor laws and DEI principles, things like that. So we're going to do a second poll here. And so we are curious to know, where have you seen AI being used in your organization so far? So when we talk about these various use cases that we've just gone through, you can choose all that will apply. And Lindsay is going to get that poll running, and we'll give you about 30 seconds. Yeah, so right off the hop, we're seeing recruitment and talent acquisition, which makes sense based on what I've read. And where else? Onboarding. Interesting. So far it kind of seems like recruitment and talent acquisition is the sort of area where it's been used the most, and then we see pretty consistent use of it across some of those other HR functions. So I think we're going to end the poll there. Oh, actually, I see there right at the bottom. So HR and admin policy work too. So interesting. All right, I'm going to share those results for a few seconds here so you can kind of get a snapshot there. So interesting. All right, let's close that up and move along. So let's get into prompt engineering, because again, this is something that the more time you spend really refining this, the more effective AI is going to be for you, right? So how are we defining prompt engineering? So this is the skill of crafting clear, specific instructions for an AI tool to get you the results that you want, right? So it's only going to be able to generate as skilled sort of as your question is for the AI, is going to be reflective of the output that you get. So what does a really good prompt look like? So let us walk through this set. So role, action, context, and outcome. So what you want to do is specify a role. So who do you want the AI to be? So you say act as an HR manager, act as an expert in policy writing, or a DEI expert. So you want to frame it as you're asking the AI to take on a very specific role. And then you want to be specific about the action that you want it to take. So you need to be really directive. So what is it that you want the AI tool to do? Do you want it to write you an email? Do you want it to summarize a policy? Do you want it to analyze data? So that you're being, as I said, really directive in terms of the action that you want the AI to take. You want to be able to provide it context, right? So what does it need to know before it spits out whatever answer it's going to spit out? So what background information might you provide to the AI tool? Is there supporting documents that you want to add in? So for example, in ChatGPT, you have the option of uploading, there's a limit to how many documents you can upload. But if there's a document that you want to upload that provides some context, that will also help the AI tool generate a better response for you. And then the outcome, right? And this is again where we want to start talking about this sort of people-centered approach. What is the tone that you want the AI tool to take? And what is the purpose? So an example of a good prompt would be act as an HR manager, draft a welcome email for a new hire based on the following onboarding checklist. So you've attached that checklist to, I'll use ChatGPT if we're using ChatGPT. The tone should be warm, it should be professional, and the message should include next steps on their first day. The other piece to that too is you can tell it what not to do, right? So don't use, overly, corporate sort of jargon, or give me two versions of this. I want one version that's really sort of formal, and I want the other version to be a little bit more, casual. So when we're talking about these prompts, what not to do, you're not going to be just really quick, rewrite this job posting to make it sound better. It's too vague. It needs to have more directive insights from you. Make this performance review nicer, or shorten this policy. You need to give it more context and background. So again, looking over to the right side of the screen, so act as a talent development specialist and improve this review by providing constructive strengths-based feedback. Summarize this 3-page hybrid work policy into a short email emphasizing flexibility and accountability. And so again, if you are new to using these tools, go in and play around with them and have some fun. I went in a couple weeks ago and I was like, how can I be a millionaire in a year's time? And it'll spit something out for you, and it's probably not going to be achievable, right? But you can be playful with it and have fun. And then, there was another one where I was like, can you act as a financial advisor and tell me where I should invest my money? And it was definitely, the tool was trained to not provide that kind of information. So I got a little laugh out of that. But you should try and just play around with the tool in ways that don't feel like overwhelming to you, and kind of just get a sense for what you can get from the tool based on what you put in, and then play around with your prompt engineering. And as I said at the top of the session, we're sending you a toolkit, and in that toolkit, you will have some examples of good prompts that you can use. So where are we at for time? I'm going to try and move through this because I want to give some time here for questions. So AI governance, guiding responsible use of AI. So we really want to think about the frameworks and the policies that we have internally that are going to set out how we're using AI in our organization. We know that there are a lot of people in our organizations right now who are probably using AI, and you don't have sort of guiding principles or governance around that. And so you really want to try and nip that in the bud as quickly as you can, because you don't know if employees are going in and using ChatGPT and dumping all kinds of sensitive information. So we need to be able to build those guardrails and help people understand how the organization, what are those sort of acceptable practices, and what they aren't. So also understanding this sort of risk threshold in your organization. So if you use like a green light, yellow light, red light kind of approach to this. So green light would be anything that is considered low risk. So something like summarizing meeting notes might be low risk. Something in that yellow light category that might be medium risk would be asking the AI tool to generate interview questions. You want to make sure that maybe the AI tool does do that, but that there's ultimately human oversight, right? That you're going to go back and you're going to review those interview questions. And red light would be things like using AI for hiring and or firing. So again, you want to be able to understand what the risk threshold is inside of your organization, and it will help guide, the decisions around the safe use of AI. And that goes back to your organizational maturity, right? And how are people understanding, the digital literacy and the impacts around inclusion and fairness and ethics. And because it's so new for all of us, it is likely that there's work that needs to be done. And again, we talked a little bit about this from a procurement perspective. You really want to be aware of how these tools have been built, how they've been designed, how they've been tested. So those are questions that you would be asking your vendors when they're coming in to share insights about whatever tools they're pitching. And then again, with the legal and the human rights, all of us need to keep a pulse on what's going to be coming down from, this new minister, and really keeping attuned to what some of those legal sort of practices, how they're evolving. This is really important for HR because we hold some of the most sensitive data in the organization, and certainly using AI will amplify organizational risk. And I'm going to share a couple stories here right now. And that's why you want to make sure that you're thinking about the guardrails that you need to be putting in place. So here, 70% of HR leaders exploring AI tools, and only 30% of organizations that actually have governance practices in place. So therein lies the risk that you might be carrying. So we need to manage that risk. So where has this gone wrong? Some of us have probably heard this story, but Amazon was using a resume screener. I think this was like back in 2018. And basically they discovered that this resume screener was penalizing resumes that had the word women's in it. So if there was a phrase like women's chess club captain, the system it was trained on historical data, which tells you sort of the gender bias that exists in sort of the technology space, right? But because it had been trained on that historical data, it flagged the word women's. And so then it was downgrading resumes that were like any of the female resumes that were coming in. So facial recognition, this was something that I think HireVue was one of the organizations that started using this. Anyhow, lots of different companies started to experiment with this, and they were using these tools to like facial analysis tools in their video interviews. So they were trying to assess, things like enthusiasm and professionalism. But what the tool actually started to focus in on were things like skin tone, facial structure, neurodivergent expressions. So what was found, there was an investigation done, and Black and brown candidates and those who had autism or anxiety were at high risk of being rated poorly. And then productivity measures. So there's tools now where they actually will assess productivity based on the keyboard, how often a keyboard is used. So basically, there were roles in sort of creative type roles. People were being flagged for low productivity because they weren't using their keyboard as often as maybe some other roles would. So again, these are those flags of, the AI can take us down the wrong road really quickly. And so these are the things that we need to be considering and thinking about. So when we're talking about these guardrails, we want to audit data sets. We want to make sure that we've got DEI leaders in there helping us review data. We want to make sure that we have tools that have explainability features. And this is something that you would be asking your vendors about. Again, explainability. What I mean by that is that the AI can explain how it came up with whatever the output is. You want to be transparent with employees about if you are using these tools in any of the HR functions. Your employees need to know how it's being used, when it's being used, why it's being used. And then you want to establish cross-functional ethics and review committees. So again, keeping a line of sight to the evolution of the governance around this piece. So Ontario has a job transparency law that's going to be coming into effect in 2026. And basically, my understanding is that if we've used AI in any sort of recruitment practice, we have to be disclosing about that. Quebec's algorithmic transparency rules. So again, any decision that has been made by AI there's a mandate around disclosure with those decisions. The AIDA is going to be a big thing for us. And I think that's Bill C-27. And I think that will be where we'll see a lot of evolution happening with this new minister. And then again, the AI strategy piece. And that's where you really want to be planful and mindful about how you're rolling out AI inside of your organization. So I'm going to leave because I see the time. So again, just making sure that you're being really intentional about how you are using the lens of ethics in rolling these things out, and your union engagement. How are you engaging the union? I am going to pass it over to Lindsay so that we can answer some questions.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Wiley, for such a thought-provoking discussion. I think you've given us a lot to really mull over here. I'm just looking through, there's a lot of questions here, which is fantastic to see. So let's go with this first one here. Could you give us some practical first steps that HR professionals can take to begin using AI responsibly?
So practical first steps, I would say, is, we were talking about that those guardrails or the risk thresholds, I should say. So when you're talking about the green light, yellow light, and the red light, first and foremost, you want to make sure that you are in that green light area, right? So things that are gonna be low risk. So, summarizing a policy or maybe using it to generate an email for you. And the thing that I will caution you here, and I'm seeing it happening all the time, is that people are overly reliant on AI for generating things like emails. This is where HR comes in, because when you get an email that's only been AI generated, you do not want to lose your voice in that, right? So if you've been somebody who has been emailing and you have a really lovely sort of informal way of communicating, and then all of a sudden you're sending these AI generated emails, people are going to be like, well, what happened to Wiley? She's like, so we have to really, there's a lot of nuance there. We can use it to help us think about other things that we might want to frame in an email, but we don't want to lose our voice in it. So hopefully that helps. Start small.
All right, so our next question here, could you speak about how AI could be used for organizational design, job evaluation, and labor relations?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the labor relations question is a big one. And I think this, again, it'll be interesting to sort of follow the bouncing ball on this with the minister. But I think what we need to do is certainly working with our unions. We need to be engaging our unions as we're starting to adopt these tools and managing our own risk, right? So thinking about things like management rights in the implementation of technology, job classification. So if we're starting to automate certain aspects of people's roles, how are we actually being really mindful about? So for example, we talked about the chatbots. If you have an employee who was sort of front facing and the person who was answering those questions, maybe their job is going to change to be managing the chatbot more instead of actually fielding those questions. So that changes somebody's job role. And so we need to be really conscious of how are these changes actually impacting jobs classifications? How are we working with unions to make sure that we are transparent about our AI strategy and our plans? So hopefully that helps to answer.
Definitely. Okay, so our next question here, how are companies addressing the sustainability of using AI? I understand there's excessive water usage to keep the servers from overheating.
Mm. So I have not heard that. So I'm not sure. And I think again, because we are at this sort of early phase of like broad digital transformation and implementation, right? Really good questions around sustainability and what are some of those impacts. That is also going to start to inform all of the legislation, right? And ethical use of AI. And so I think as we start to use it, there's going to be lots more issues around sustainability that start to emerge. And then we're going to have to see like what are those regulations that will be imposed on organizations. So great question. And a bit of TBD, right? We don't know entirely.
Mhm. How can we ensure, and I think you've sort of covered a bit of this already, how can we ensure ethical use of AI in processes like recruitment and performance management?
Right. Yeah. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we are scrubbing any, personal identifiers from any of the data that we are using with AI. And same thing with performance. I mean, I think the other piece to it too is transparency, which is why I think some of these we're going to see that those governance pieces coming up around there. Disclosure, right? Around if we are using AI in our hiring practices, how are we making sure that our candidates are aware of that? Other pieces of having confidence in the data that we're inputting into the tool, having confidence in the tool itself that it's been properly trained, right? So that it doesn't have bias. So there's a number of different steps that you need to take to really make sure that we are sort of applying that critical lens to the ways that we're using AI, especially because what we do in HR is all people focused, right? So what is the impact on our people? And so we need to be thinking about that on the front end. We don't want that to be an afterthought.
Mhm. I'm just seeing we have about 2 minutes left here. How do we build AI literacy within HR teams without overwhelming them?
Good question. So I think, a great opportunity here is for the folks that are on this call today, what are even sharing the toolkit with your employees, right? And going through really some of those basics. And again, some people are going to be more advanced than other people, but what we want to make sure is that we are building a shared language inside our organization so that we are creating equity, right, across the organization from the start, right? What do all of these terms mean? How do these different AI tools work? What is the data? What are our data requirements when we're using AI? So it's really about walking people through this process. But you should really start building out, guidelines, what are the practices? What is the AI strategy so that people understand what does it mean in your context? How does your organization use it based on your values, right? What does your organization expect the AI tools to do for it? So it will be individual, but you've got to do that knowledge sharing piece. So take some of the insights from today and bring those back into your organization.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Wiley. So it does look like we've reached the end of today's session. I do thank everyone for being here today. And of course, a special thanks to Wiley for leading us through this really engaging and timely session on AI in the HR space. If today's session has sparked your interest in how AI can support your workforce planning and your decision making, please check out our brand new program, the AI Powered Workforce Planning Program, which again is running in October this year in our virtual classroom. So keep an eye out on your inbox later this week for more details. Lastly, we also have another webinar that's coming up next month on August 13th. So if you haven't signed up already, please feel free to do so just on our website. And thanks again, everyone, of course, for being here today. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.